My name is Professor Wallace Ford. I'm a professor in the Department of Public Administration here at Medgar College and a supporter of the Center for Black Literature, and have been participating in all of the National Black Writers Conferences since I've been here. I think this is the 9th year of doing this, so it's my pleasure to be here. Now our roundtable participants will discuss Black speculative fiction's impact on popular culture. Our speakers will discuss the explosion of Black speculative fiction in popular culture, film, music, comic books, politics, video games, and of course, literature. They will explore the reasons for this explosion, examine the impact of the interest in social media on Black speculative fiction, and reflect on how their writing represents the intersection of popular culture and speculative fiction. It's my pleasure to read the biography of the moderator for today. Mr. Jarvis Sheffield is a proud father, husband, and member of Lake Providence Missionary Baptist Church and Omega Psi Phi fraternity. I'll have to introduce you to my brother sometime. He's one of your brothers. All right. Okay. So he has been involved in various forms of multimedia and education for over 30 years. He has done graphic design, web design, video, animation, multimedia, game design, VR and AR, and 3D printing. He has authored technical articles for various publications and taught seminars, workshops, training, and classes on STEAM, technology, and education. He holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in Interdisciplinary Studies from Tennessee State University and earned a Master's in Education from Trevecca Nazarene University. He holds leadership positions as coordinator of the Tennessee State University Media Centers, facilitates the Tennessee State University's Makerspace Lab, administrator of Black Science Fiction Society, I take a breath here, and director of Dragon Con Diversity Track and Marketing Committee, chair of the Tennessee Share Library Consortium. His publications include Genesis Science Fiction Anthologies, Genesis Science Fiction Magazine, Our Heritage Coloring Book Series, and Earth Squadron Comic Book Series. He is joined today by Tim Felder, Jesse J. Holland, Christine Taylor-Butler, and Yatasha Womack. And you can read all about our guests and the amazing work that they do in our program journal. At this point, it's my pleasure, Jarvis, to say it's all yours, brother.
I'm very honored and thankful to be here with these esteemed panelists today. Christine Taylor-Butler, Tim Fielder, Jesse Holland, Yatasha Womack. I'm happy that they're here to share a wealth of knowledge with us today and their experience in the genre. The topic today is Black speculative fiction's impact on popular culture. And I want each person here to just give us a short introduction of yourself.
Tim Fielder, visual Afrofuturist and graphic novelist, primarily known for my books, Infinitum, an Afrofuturist tale from HarperCollins, and Maddie's Rocket from Diesel Funk Studios, and presently exhibiting at the Smithsonian.
Awesome. Awesome.
I'm getting off the panel now. I'm Christine Taylor-Butler. I am a recovering MIT-trained civil engineer who now writes children's books for a living. I've got close to 100 in print. I'm known for my speculative series, The Lost Tribes, and I have to give a shout out to my editor, Eileen Robinson, whose publishing company just got acquired by Charles Bridge Books. And I also, which is not Black speculative, have been asked by Random House to write 3 titles in Chelsea Clinton's Save the Animals series. They called me, I didn't call them. So I'm happy to be here, and I have a lot of opinions.
Hi, my name is Yatasha Womack. I'm most known for a book I wrote called Afrofuturism, The World of Black Sci-Fi and Fantasy Culture. Since that book came out, I talk about theory around Afrofuturism again, which is just Black cultural relationships to space and time. And I also write science fiction and Afrofuturist works. Among them, my books, Rayla 2212, Spaceship in Bronzeville, and I use Afrofuturism as a way of thinking about dance. So I do Afrofuturism experience workshops or Afrofuturism dance therapy, intermixing storytelling and dance with kids. Well, there's a lot of really cool things going on in Afrofuturism, but I'll mention two. One, Carnegie Hall did an Afrofuturism showcase festival in 2022, between February and April. I was one of the co-curators of that experience. And then also the exhibit that Tim mentioned called Afrofuturism, History of Black Futures, is currently up for a year at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, also known as the African American History Museum at the Smithsonian. And that they issued a book, and I contributed essays to that book, which is currently out, in addition to being featured in their exhibit. So I encourage everyone to check that out. But generally speaking, I use Afrofuturism as a modality to help people connect with themselves and to think about futures and travel a great deal talking about that subject.
And I'm the poor cousin they put all the way down at the end of the panel. So my name is Jesse J. Holland. I do a lot of stuff, but more specifically for this, I wrote the first Black Panther novel, Black Panther, Who is the Black Panther? I edited and wrote in the Black Panther anthology, Black Panther Tales of Wakanda. I wrote Star Wars The Force Awakens Finn's story for Lucasfilm Books. Later on this year, I'm editing and writing in the Captain America Sam Wilson anthology that's coming out ahead of Captain America 4. And I'm working on a African American science fiction and history anthology called Dark Journeys that should be out soon.
Very impressive. Let's dip into our origins of how you first got introduced to speculative fiction and Black speculative fiction. For me, it was Star Trek and Star Wars and things of that nature. And my first Black story that I saw was in, I believe it was called Cosmic Slop. There was Space Traders was a Afrofuturistic type story. So with that said, could you tell me, each of you, your first introduction to speculative fiction and your first introduction to Black speculative fiction? Just jump.
Oh, okay. So I was a nerdy, overweight kid, and my dad, who's sitting in the audience, so I have to be careful what I say, was an athlete, and I was just not athletic. I was the art kid, always at the store buying books and going to the art museum. And back then, there was not a lot at the drugstore with people who looked like me. So I was always reading the sci-fi anthologies and the horror anthologies and watching Alfred Hitchcock. And what really turned me on was Star Trek and Uhura. And I had made a note about this because if you think about it, here's this woman who's going to quit the show. Because she felt like they weren't developing her. And Martin Luther King, as the story goes, told her, you can't quit because you're put on that ship as if you're an equal. And what other images do we have on television that are like that? So not only didn't she, but they've since developed the story so that you understood that she's command. She could literally take over if she need to. And one of the notes I wrote for myself is, if you want to see what the impact of that is, there are now two other Uhuras, because in the Star Trek reboot, they have Zoe Saldana playing Uhura. And if you are following Star Trek Strange New Worlds, they have introduced Uhura as a young girl who is a genius. And so that legacy has moved on. I had the privilege of meeting her at a Star Trek convention in Kansas City, and I told her that at the time that I was growing up, it was not a thing for a girl to want to be an engineer. And I said, but you were on television and you were an inspiration that allowed me to shut out all those, you can't go to MIT and apply and get in. So that was my inspiration.
I would say I was a kid who was very curious. I was always asking questions. And early on, I wanted to be a scientist. But I also grew up in a very musical family, a family that really valued music and art. And, so I remember being a kid looking at the album covers for Parliament Funkadelic. You have the Egyptian imagery, you have the space imagery, there's Earth, Wind, and Fire album covers. And, hip hop was emerging, but you still had, funk music very much sort of prevalent. And I'm looking at, just was all these like exciting space images. Very early on, I had two formative, I would say, Black media experiences. One was this annual viewing of The Wiz, which we don't think of as Afrofuturist, but this whole narrative of a woman being, or a teen, but in the case of the movie, Diana Ross, a woman being transported to another world, and she's in this sort of reimagined urban landscape, of Harlem that's just fantastic. So that was the costuming, the excitement, the whole idea of everything you ever needed, you already had. All of that, between the dance and the music, what just made it look like the adult world was one that was like a big discotheque, right? But at the same time, I'm watching, we had annual viewing of the miniseries Roots. So I started looking at both narratives as stories about younger people who are transported to these worlds. One is fictional and fantasy-based, one is historical, but both are speaking to me and are stories that help me understand who I was, from a familial cultural standpoint, but also from a fantastic one. And somewhere in there, I think as a kid who read probably more science books and nonfiction. I was a kid who read science and history, not so much, fiction. And I just started to really think about, see a relationship between history and science that really evolved into a playground for thinking about what we now call Afrofuturism. I grew up in a spiritual community that valued metaphysics. So you're always thinking about who you are in the universe, who you are in relationship to the earth, and you're also thinking about your identity as being sort of expanded. You're not just who you show up in this particular space and time can differ if you come into another space and time, even if you look the same, right? And this was something that was just sort of emphasized in the community that I was in. So by the time I went to college and I was talking to, a fellow student who was talking about like Parliament Funkadelic, and then he's talking about African cultures and empires and wanting to learn more about their wisdom systems, but then he's also talking about deconstructing hip hop lyrics, and he's talking about new technologies and changing the future. And I remember asking him, what is this? And it's a story I tell a lot because I remembered hearing about all those things. I related to all of them, but I never heard someone talk about them all at the same time. And when I said, well, what is this? I now see that as a genesis moment for thinking about Afrofuturism and eventually writing about it, just sort of bringing to light a lot of ideas about space and time and science fiction and tech and Black cultures that are all around us, but people didn't always feel comfortable speaking about publicly because they felt alienated because some of these ideas weren't all supposed to be presented as one.
All right.
I can't follow that, but I'll try. Well, my entree point was comic books. I mean, I'm still to this day a comic book guy. My dad started buying me comic books when I was like 5 years old, and I've been reading comic books ever since. But it was in college. I had been reading comic books my entire time in elementary, junior high, I guess that's middle school now, and high school. But it was in college that the shift happened. I was actually here in New York doing an internship. And some friends from back home said, hey, have you read these books that have been put out by this company called Milestone? And I started picking up Icon and Static and Blood Syndicate and Zombie and Shadow Cabinet and started seeing a whole nother way of telling these stories that I've been growing up reading. Because, of course, I knew about Jon Stewart and Jim Rhodes, but you knew when Jon Stewart picked up his Green Lantern ring, Hal Jordan was coming back. It was temporary. And if Jim Rhodes was Iron Man, Tony Stark was coming back. It was temporary. But Milestone was now telling stories where the heroes looked like me. And they were the stars, not one of the stars, not a replacement star. Static was Static. And it, for me, it sparked in my mind a whole different way of telling stories. That these same stories I'd grown up on could be told by people who look like me using characters that look like me. And it's all, I almost feel bad about it now that I hadn't thought that could be done before then, but I hadn't. And still to this day, one of my proudest achievements was the internship I was working on that summer in New York. I was actually working for the New York Times. And I convinced the New York Times that Milestone was so significant that we should write a story about it. And I got the New York Times to let me write a story about Milestone that made section front in the style section. Of course, since I was an intern, interns didn't get bylines at the New York Times. So nobody knows I wrote it. And when they did the Milestone documentary earlier this year, they feature the story. And I'm like, my name should be there. But it was then, and as you can see from my writing, it's still now comic books that really brought me into this field and what I'm still really interested in.
All right, that was fantastic. I had those same comic books, and don't forget hardware.
Yeah, I don't know if I can follow that. I'll try to, pare it down. So I come from a family of nerds, grew up across the street from a cotton field in Clarksdale, Mississippi. Because there wasn't as much to do, the comics played a part, films played a part. I started drawing and doing comics at the age of 4 or 5. And like most artists who do comics, you start out by drawing what you see. You see mostly white characters. Around the age of 12, 13, I had a traumatic incident with my oldest brother, and he got on me because I had created a character that was called the Master. And he was a white man with swords, and he said, do you understand what you're doing? And I was like thinking myself, well, Master like Jedi Master. And he said, no, you are creating a character that is pulling from a racist modality, and you need to correct that. Now, as this was my oldest brother, I could have been totally rebellious and went the opposite way, but I all of a sudden went all black. And that had such an effect on me that I've been a visual Afrofuturist all this time. As you guys can see, it has made me the wealthiest man in the world. And it's so fascinating now to be in the middle of this because that incident, and as well as seeing Night of the Living Dead, where a black character, Alien, a black character can be the most efficient, but they sacrifice and they die. Or maimed, or the complete absence of black women. So I set about my life to correct that. And it's been an interesting ride.
Awesome, that's fantastic. Now, I've heard this term interchangeably here, Black speculative fiction, and there's been mention of Afrofuturism. What's the correlation here?
Could they be the same?
They are.
Because, here's the deal. There was a joke, for those of you old enough to remember Richard Pryor, who said the reason why there are no blacks in a lot of these shows is because people don't see us existing in the future.
Right.
And so the whole idea of, as early as 10 years ago, I was trying to sell The Lost Tribes about kids who, spoiler, don't know their parents are scientific observers from another planet. And so I had some of the best mentors in children's publishing. I mean, these were award-winning editors and authors, and Jane Yolen, who was like a grand dragon for Science Fiction Writers America. We could not sell that book because there was a sense that, first off, we don't live in the future. Something like Uhura is like an exception, or this book is really well written, but it's a little too intelligent, or white people are not going to read a book about a black kid and a black family. And so it took 10 years and firing 2 agents. And if Black Panther had come out 10 years ago, it might have struggled too, but now you have Black Panther, and this is no shade to the other author, but you have Black Panther coming out around the same time as Hate U Give, and Black Panther is making $1 billion. Hate U Give is barely earning out its production budget, and it's because we had been telling publishers and filmmakers and stuff that there is this untapped need for work like that. I've been reading Black Panther when he married Storm. That's the original story. Things have to make money for everyone who's been a part of the problem to go, oh, hey, maybe we should acquire more of that. So you see a lot of people coming into the field self-publishing to get the work out, because there was no other way to get those voices made. But speculative fiction, for me, meant we get a seat at the table, that the books don't have to be about civil rights and slavery. They don't have to be about cop shootings and oppression. They can be about us building spaceships. They can be about us exploring. They can be about imagining of what it looks like to live in the United States if history had been different. And so I always say they're kind of the same.
Yeah, I know sometimes when people talk about, Black speculative fiction, I mean, depending on how they're using the terminology, they could just be talking about it as a literary space. Mm-hmm. Afrofuturism, can be an aesthetic, right? Or it could be a way of looking at the world. Or it could be a way of helping people heal, particularly as it relates to the imagination. Some of that is just the whole idea of thinking of people of the African diaspora of the continent in the future. For some, is a liberating exercise, and for some, even test their imagination. So I kind of see them, depending on what you're talking about, as being very much kind of interrelated. There is a Black speculative fiction manifesto. The previous Ronaldo Anderson, who was here earlier, I'm sure he spoke to that. But I think generally speaking, these are overlapping ideas. Sometimes Black speculative fiction is used as an umbrella to engage a lot of different genres that we would describe as speculative. Some of that could be futuristic. Some of that could be surrealist. There's also a term that Amiri Baraka first started talking about called the Afro-surreal, which is kind of the sense of non-reality of a present, which is also, again, there's an Afro-surreal manifesto as well, right? And all of these are just, I think what's super cool is that you have these terms to describe the nuances of how people of the African diaspora and continent are looking at quote unquote speculation, Black horror. You think about the work of a Jordan Peele or others. I mean, that could fall in the range of what you call Black speculative fiction. And sometimes fantasy works that people create, some people don't feel quite comfortable saying that it's Afrofuturist. but they'll say, oh, but it's very much fantasy. Sometimes they'll use the term Afro fantasy. The point is, it just all falls in the umbrella. And we're now at a space where the terminology that we're using is projected out further than the projections placed upon us. And that, I think, is what's really cool.
The only thing I'll add is that there are people who dislike certain terms as Afrofuturism. For example, Nnedi Okorafor will tell you that she doesn't write Afrofuturism, that she doesn't like that term. You also will have people who say, well, I don't write Black speculative fiction. My only thing that I will say here is that I don't want to see us as a community start trying to exclude people.
Yeah.
Because we've had enough of the industry trying to exclude us.
Definitely.
We don't need to be trying to say that this fits and this does not. I will say, as somebody who has a toe in the Black Panther world, that it's one of the things I continually have to fight in my mind about. Because when someone says, I've been reading Black Panther so long, I remember when he married Storm, the first thing that came through my mind was, if you don't know who Monica Lynn is, you're not a Black Panther fan. Because you haven't been reading long enough. You met Black Panther through the movies, while those of us who read the comic book know about Serpent Falls and Monica Lynn. But that's just setting up this imaginary wall saying,
Right.
I'm better than you are because I've been here and you haven't. We do need to police now. Do not make you think that I'm saying that there are not people who are trying to take advantage of the wave, who haven't put the work in. But I'm also saying that we need to be sure we don't unfairly exclude people because what they write doesn't fit to our definition of what we write is.
Right.
So we just need to be careful that we are inclusive, not exclusive when we start throwing terms around.
Right. I think when I made the comment about Storm.
See, Black Panther fight. Okay,
Yeah,
let's go.
Here we go. The reason why I made the point, and maybe it was inelegant, is I was making notes for myself about the panel, and I was looking at articles about the impact of speculative fiction on modern culture, and inevitably, when you get out there, you see the exact same names, and if you talk to people in the industry and you say Octavia Butler, for instance, they go, Kindred.
Right.
And I go, this is a slave story. Octavia Butler wrote other things that are brilliant. And so when I made the comment about Storm, there are a lot of people who will look at the movies and that is the only lexicon that they know.
Right.
And what we're trying to say is there has been Black speculative fiction, horror, fantasy, science fiction that was maybe not cool, but has been out there for decades. And the industry is now picking its winners. And it is leaving a lot of people who have done a lot of good work on the sidelines. It's kind of like when people come up to me and say, you write children's books. Have I heard of you? And I go, well, I've written 100 books, so you already answered your question, but the first book sold 100,000 copies, so where were you? The point is, I'm not famous, I don't want to be. But I write a lot, I reach a lot of kids. There are a lot of speculative fiction authors out there and people who are writing about speculative fiction from the nonfiction side who don't have publicists, and they don't have a marketing campaign, and they don't have a movie deal, but their work is reaching an awful lot of people. So I would challenge all of us to start expanding the lexicon by talking about all the people who don't get talked about.
And I think
You got Tim here.
that,
Tim had that opportunity.
Well, go ahead. You start and I'll finish.
oh no, I was just gonna say, and that's one of the beauties of the terminology, is that we're now able to look at a lot of work, some of which were acknowledged, some of which were not, and think about them as part of a lineage and a legacy that's broader. Whether we're thinking about Martin Delaney's work when he's, writing Blake Huts of America, this is a series of articles or fictionalized story that came out in the 1850s, you know, where he's speculating about having a kind of revolution during enslavement period and then going to Cuba and having this be, you know, the utopic space for people of African descent. That was a speculative piece, but then simultaneously, he actually did lead one of the first Back to Africa movements years later. So we can look at something like that now and say, oh, wait a second, this falls under the realm of Black speculative fiction, right? Cosmic Slop, the TV series that you mentioned that was on HBO, that was put together, that's a series that had a lot of impact, but isn't always discussed. You know, clearly it's referencing a Parliament Funkadelic album, but I think one of the stories might have been Space Traders. You know, that was one of the short stories that they took and they, you know, actualized. So we're able to kind of take all of these works and think about them as part of this broader lineage. You can even take something, you think about the abstraction of a Basquiat, or you think about, you know, other sorts of spaces, and you suddenly start to see, wait a minute, there's a lot of speculative nature around just how many people of African descent tend to think. And I think, as you mentioned, because we're kind of in a space, at least especially for the past 10 years, where it's easier to self-publish, easier to get the word out, that we find more connectivity. And I think that's probably also why some of these terms have become a little more popular than they were in the past.
Yeah, I'd say the terminology to me is not as important, you know, because at the end of the day, it's, you know, it's involving Black characters, Black people in situations that are otherworldly or outside of the norm. And I think that's a good thing. Afrofuturism is a term, you know, Mark Derry created it. Sounds dope, I'll use it. But that's as, you know, the form itself is all variations of the same idea. And I don't mind that. I just think what's most important to me right now, as I stand here, sit here at least, is that it's more important to focus for me as an operator right now on just getting the work done. It's so crucially important now that the opportunities, the fact that we actually have a panel here, an entire conference devoted to Black speculative fiction is crazy. This is something that 10 years ago, I mean, I came to New York in '87, this was not possible. Mm-hmm. This was not possible. I'm telling you it wasn't possible because I was there and it would say it was not possible. But the fact that now we are here, what is it Octavia says about change? Change, it's an amazing thing. And time, right? The perception of time is everything. And with the perception of time, we have the ability to quantify what those things are. It happens gradually unless you get like geopolitical or financial disruptions that come along that kind of speed things up or slow it down. But it keeps happening. And that's the beauty of what we do. And I am overjoyed to be in front of all these people talking about this subject.
The term Afrofuturism, for me, was a real genesis point, as it was, I think, for many people, because it took two subjects, Africa and the future, and put them together in one word. And it made people realize that they weren't always associating those two concepts together.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. You know, I think it's a reminder for people everywhere that people of African descent in the continent have a relationship to space and time, that we have cosmologies that inform how we think about the world, that we have lived experiences that ground us in a relationship to the universe that we're in. So for that reason, I think the term, for some people when they first hear it, it kind of creates a little cognitive dissonance where they're like, whoa, wait a second. And that's just enough to help people be open and receptive to a side of humanity and our perspectives about futures that aren't always highlighted in society. So for that reason, I would say terminology, I'm not saying that. I think the term is significant, but I think what's most important is that we're talking about the concept.
Right.
Well, and I want to add something because I write primarily for children, for major publishers. And so I'm going through a gatekeeping system that doesn't really know African American kids. I get a lot of, would a kid say this? Do kids act like this? And that's why it was so hard to get Tribes as a sci-fi series through the system. But I want you to think about what century we're in. I gave up my job working as an engineer because I was interviewing kids for MIT and meeting kids who were not reading except for what was assigned in class. And I then went to mentor at one of the local African-centered schools, and all of the women there were having trouble getting control of our tables of girls. And I said to the principal, what's going on? It was a relatively new school, so these kids had not come up through their system. And she says, they don't think they're going to live past 21. So they don't think they have anything to lose because they don't think they're going to be alive. And here I am at home encouraging my kid, hey, apply for this program so you can go spend a year in Italy in high school. And I was the odd person out in my African-American neighborhood. So one year I go down to Rogers, Arkansas, to the Walmart-sponsored children's publishing, and I spoke to 25 schools over the course of a week. And on the last day, a teacher came back and said, one of the girls was confused about whether or not you were African-American. And I said, yeah. And she said, well, she's confused how you got into MIT. And after a long conversation, she said, so she wanted to go and teach us. Well, she had to study really hard. And she said, but does that mean a kid like me can go to a school like that? And I want you to think about what century we're in. So if I were to say before Barack Obama, there was another president, it was Morgan Freeman. Because what happens is, in literature and in media, having those positive, non-stereotypical roles not only starts getting the message to our own community, you can achieve more than the end of your block, but it also tells people who are not part of our community that we are not the stereotypes you see. So I wrote an article on the importance of science fiction in children's literature, and the question that I posed was, this was right after we had the Michael Brown shooting in Ferguson, which is 4 hours from me. And I said, would we have fewer Darren Wilsons shooting Black kids if we stopped telling the world that the only heroes in the world look like them and the only villains look like us? So I literally quit my job as an engineer and gave up the benefits package to write books where I could sneak messages to kids in books. And what are the most popular books? It's the speculative stuff that I've been reaching, because really what speculative fiction is about hope and a dream that we can exist in a bigger space than what the world says that we're entitled to have.
And Jarvis, I know you have another question, but I just want to jump in right here at the end.
Go ahead.
Where we're talking about how, the point is how Black speculative fiction affects society and how it affects popular culture. When you look at Barack Obama becoming president, I want you to count backwards. How many fictional series before Barack Obama featured a Black president? Mm-hmm. You had Chris Rock.
Yep.
You had Eddie Murphy. All of that, if you ask me, all of that for the first time normalized in people's minds that an African-American man could be president.
Yeah, who's the guy from the Allstate commercial?
Dennis
Haysbert.
Yes. From 24.
From 24, yeah.
Morgan Freeman.
Yeah.
True.
So, all of that for the first time normalized, not just in white America's mind, but also in Black America's mind, that, you know what, it's possible that we can have a Black president. That's not weird. We've seen that on television. Mm-hmm. So these are ways that fiction actually has direct effect on not just the lives of people in the future, but our lives. And then, by the way, then you want to count the number of movies you've seen with a white woman as president, which we've now seen more and more. Mm-hmm. And I'm waiting on the movies that show a Black woman as president. We haven't seen those at all.
The Earth Squadron movie hasn't come out yet.
I'm sorry?
I said the Earth Squadron movie hasn't come out yet.
Not yet. But this is how the writing of fiction, I think, has a direct effect on our lives as Americans today. Not just our lives as Americans, the lives of us as humans on this planet.
Right.
And that's why it's so important for us to tell these stories,
Right.
regardless of whether it's science fiction or historical fiction. This is why these stories are so important. Sorry, Jarvis. Take that in.
Hey, that's fantastic information. I've noticed that there's been like a significant increase in the amount of Black speculative fiction and Afrofuturism. As an example, in addition to Black Science Fiction Society, we started a group called Afrofuturism Central 6 years ago. And between November of last year and now, we went from 18,000 people to 180,000 people last week. What do you attribute the increase in interest for this genre to?
All right, I have an opinion about that. All right, so check it out. The great thing about AI, which a lot of people are terrified of, I'm not terrified of it. It's okay for me, it's just a tool. Since November of last year, we have had a 100-fold increase of Afrofuturist images. Now, I would implore everybody here to join Afrofuturism Central if you haven't. And you will see things that prior to November of last year, you only saw, maybe you saw it in some indie comic books, right? Black indie comic books. You would go to the Schaumburg Black Comic Book Festival or ECBAC or Dragon Con even. You would see it there, right? But generally, in terms of easy access, that's what Afrofuturism Central, that's what it's done. That's why it's grown exponentially, because it's allowed people who are not traditionally artists. They're not traditional, they don't draw, but they can use text prompts to create images to say, hey, I want to have an Egyptian society that's merged with cyberpunk. And that text will generate that image using Midjourney or I think it's called Blue Willow, I forget.
A slew of them.
Yeah, it's a slew of them out there that basically that's the world we're entering into. It's a world that our children, it will be completely different for them. That you will not have an issue knowing what it's like to see Black characters as kings and queens and pilots of spaceships, presidents, the whole thing. So that's why that's happened. Now, the interesting thing, and I'll close out by saying this technology doesn't care what anyone thinks. It doesn't. And so what that means, even for me, I've had to embrace for many, many years, I don't even draw on paper anymore. I draw with a 32-inch drawing tablet. And the reason why I do that is because the tech allows me to do more, faster, more efficiently to be able to get my work out. And that's why that's happening.
Okay, I have a couple of really quick opinions.
Okay.
Because I went to MIT and I have an understanding that brilliant people don't always have fully developed prefrontal cortexes. That's why you get bombs, because people go, oh, this is a cool thing to develop, and they don't think about how it's going to be used. There are anthologies and publishers who are now seeing 2/3 of their submissions coming from artificial intelligence. Right now, the stuff is bad, so it's easy to spot, but it's swamping things. The thing that we need to be really concerned about is, one, authors and illustrators deserve to get paid for their work. And after a while, what's happening is there are people who are creating this not for the better good, but for a profit motive, which means that at a certain point in time, you're not going to have content creators creating the content. You're going to have artificial intelligence creating the content, because it will be indistinguishable from what a real person might envision. So there's a happy medium, but the funny thing about speculative fiction is it's like HAL in Space Odyssey. At a certain point in time, science fiction has already been predicting here's when it works well, and here's when it doesn't, because science or speculative fiction has always been a cautionary tale. So I would throw that out. But also the enormous rise in the internet and social media has allowed people to reach an audience, and I mean that in a good way, that they couldn't reach when it was a brick and mortar store that didn't want their book, or they had to self-publish and sell it out of their the trunk of their car. And I also saw a lot more teens writing fan fiction about things that they like. So I think part of this whole explosion is the way the internet has changed to allow people to have an access to an audience that used to require a publishing gatekeeper, a mostly white publishing gatekeeping system to get through. So in that way, I think that's been a good thing and has really fueled. For instance, I met Jarvis on the internet through the Black Science Fiction Society. And then Jarvis said, hey, we're doing diversity at DragonCon. And I'd always been curious about DragonCon, so I went, and it was standing room only. So I have been able to connect with colleagues in a way that I wasn't able to connect before. I just think that we have to be diligent about there are really good things about the internet, and there are some things which appear on their face good right now. But if you start watching some of the shows that are on like Netflix and stuff where they talk about deep fake and not knowing if you're really looking at the real person or it's a deep fake, we also have to be really careful about what technology can do that might disrupt our industry in a not so positive way.
Yeah, I think too that there's a lot of, I think about like that period of 2010, 2011, 2012. There were a lot of shifts taking place that lent itself to the popularity of your site, as you mentioned, Jarvis, or, its evolution, in recent months. And I think one thing that helped with that is the popularity of these terms that we're talking about, Black speculative fiction and Afrofuturism, and the fact that you had a lot of people within the academy who were teaching and talking about these ideas, actively looking at science fiction as a way to think about futures. And then the first thing they realize is, wow, this canon's not very diverse. We need to look to other cultural lenses. Okay, here's a term called Afrofuturism. Here's Black speculative fiction. And so you have, I think, a lot of people within the academy who are actively looking at these terms, the ideas around them, creating a lot of works to teach it as a modality of thinking about the future. And then in addition to that, you have people teaching comics now in college. All of that is kind of new within the past decade or so. Not just how to draw, but the theory behind it. Comics in the past was considered the lower scale on the art spectrum, right? Not so much anymore. And then I think because of some of this synergy, and then I have to also credit, a lot of people who are putting Black comic book conventions together. I think about Tertel Lee out of Chicago. He started the Black Age in Comics. He started the first Black comic book convention, but now you have several. There's ECBOC in Philadelphia. There's the one in Atlanta. Was that OnyxCon?
OnyxCon.
Right.
BlurredCon in DC.
BlurredCon in DC. Right. And
Motor
these are
City Black Age
spaces
in
where,
Comics.
the first, I launched my Rayla book, which I self-published at a comic book convention. And so these are spaces where kids, families can meet creators of color who are making these works. They can buy posters, they can buy, independent comics, they can buy self-published books, they can buy a mix of all of them. That synergy, I think, has kind of lent itself to, wait a second, we could create these things. I can find the people who are making these works because I can go online and find where they are. I can purchase them online. I can see where they're speaking. I could go find them somewhere. All of that created a synergy, which, in my opinion, led to the film Black Panther even being made.
Right.
Right? Because it showed, wait, there's a demand, not just from Black audiences to see Black comic book characters, but people of all ethnicities and backgrounds want to see another relationship to space and time, other takes on science fiction, because they've seen so much of a particular range of stories for a very long time. And so, I actually, it's funny we're talking about, that Black Panthers become a part of this conversation because you can't get around it if you're working in science fiction. It is both the space that your work is compared to, right? There's the before the Black Panther film came out, and there's the after the Black Panther film came out. And whether you were independent or not, everyone kind of got a bump
Right.
when the film came out because it showed that not only do these works and perspectives exist, but that there's a global demand for it and that it can be structured in the mainstream. But clearly, your relationship to space and time isn't just about validation in mainstream spaces. There's a real work that's community centered as well around helping kids and families to think about futures or to be informed by their futures. So they're kind of two different spaces which work in tandem. And last point I'll just make is that I have a book coming out in October called Black Panther, A Cultural Phenomenon, which is specifically about the comic and talks about fans and their relationship to the comic over the years and breaking down storylines. But more specifically, and what I was excited about is thinking about how the ideas about Black utopias or protopias or heroism informed those who would eventually write about the comic, as much as we in some ways came to be informed by some of these stories. So, we're talking about fiction and nonfiction worlds. Yes, there is a tangible interrelationship between the two. Sometimes what we think is possible is based on things that are in the media that we see. That's why so many of us are sort of dedicated to creating these works in all formats to share with people.
I was going to slip in when you were talking about festivals. A really good friend of mine helped found the local Black comic book festival. So it'll be at the 11th annual will be at the Schomburg Center, April 14th and 15th if you're in the New York area. And it went from a really small event to a huge event. And so
Jerry
Jerry Craft. Jerry Craft, who is the author of New Kid, which is the first graphic novel to ever win the American Library Association's Newbery Award for a graphic novel. And it's now in 13 languages. So.
Didn't he also
let me
do
just-
Mama's Boys for about 20 years?
Yeah, Mama's Boys, yep.
Yeah, Mama's Boys. Yeah.
Let me add one thing here just on the very end of this topic, and this is something that I think about a lot as an author as well, is that we have to acknowledge that the sophistication of the audience has changed. I was just watching on TV recently, maybe literally a couple of days ago, Jennifer Aniston was complaining that current audiences finds Friends to be problematic. And I was like, I have to tell you, I never watched the show because I was watching Martin and In Living Single. So I've never seen an episode of Friends, so I don't know what she's talking about. In the past, our audiences didn't have the option to watch or read something that had characters that looked like them. We had 3 TV stations. Well, for those of us from Mississippi, we had 3 TV stations. And
If you include PBS, go ahead.
Well, I'm including the PBS both in Memphis and Tupelo.
Those are the days.
But our audience didn't have the option to go out and find Black speculative fiction because it wasn't offered to them. The internet has changed everything. So now people who are looking for these stories have places they can go find it. It wasn't that the interest was never there, it's just that the material wasn't there for them.
Well, and sometimes the justification for its existence.
Right, exactly.
From a
Well,
marketing
it
standpoint.
wasn't available. I remember growing up, it was a question for the previous panel, what white writers did you read growing up? I grew up reading Terry Brooks and Peter David. And I found Octavia Butler and Milestone in college. I'm sure there were Black speculative fiction novels out there when I grew up in the 80s, but I didn't have access to them. I had access to what was available in the Marshall County Library. And so I read the areas in which the subjects were available to me. Now, despite all of the attempts to ban books, unless they shut down the internet, the audiences are going to find the stories that they want. And this is why we see such a popularity on the website, is because there's an audience that wants it, and so they're going to find it regardless of whether it comes through the gatekeepers of the publishing industry or whether they're going to find the stories that they want. And we need to understand that as authors. There's an audience for our work. We just have to make our work available for them to find it.
Well, here's your assignment. Here's your assignment. I have a lot of friends in the industry, and we now have, I'm on the board of a children's literature retreat, and we have an offshoot of that called Black Creatives. And I cannot tell you how shocking it is when I go, oh, that's that person, and she got the NAACP award. I think, oh my God, here's all these. And then you find out they're not making any money. And they're not getting any marketing from their publishers. And the publishers have already decided which one or two of us is going to get all the bandwidth. And in that same publisher, because I went after one publisher who happened to be at the retreat, we have a lot of editors there, and I said, you're not giving so-and-so marketing, and you're not giving, and she said, that's not us. She says, that's the movie company doing that. And I said, but what it makes it look like is this is the book that everyone's buzzing. You are now the buzz. That's the assignment that I'm giving you. Be wary of the books, not because they're not good, some are better than others, that get all of the marketing and you see all the buzz. Because I had a publicist who's already got reviewers lined up and got a TV slot lined up. Your job is to take a book you loved that not a lot of people are talking about and you buzz it. And sometimes that buzz is 5 minutes on Amazon and Goodreads, writing a review saying, I like this book. Or objectively saying, this book wasn't for me but here's why. Because with Amazon, once those authors reach a 50 review threshold, 50 reviews, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, they all pay a little bit more attention. Then the publishers pay a little more attention, and the next book that author puts out might get a little more marketing support. But when you see people showing up at literary festivals, they are self-funding because the publishers are giving the money to Rick Riordan. So I'm telling you, the best thing that you can do to support an author or an illustrator is buzz it, tweet it, write a review about it to let people know, especially those publishers, that someone is paying attention. Does not have to be my book, because you could, but I've been in too many meetings, I've been doing this for 20 years now, where people are literally crying because they put their heart and soul in a project, it got acquired, and then the publisher says, yeah, it's sink or swim, because we've already decided at acquisitions what is going to be our front list and is going to get all the money.
All right, and piggybacking off of that, I want to emphasize taking personal responsibility to help this genre grow and move forward. Just like this event we have here, you have people with books and artwork and things out here for sale. Support them with your dollars. Once people say support, it doesn't mean support to me unless there's some money behind it, because that's what moves the world these days. And we have a number of events just like this around the world, around the country. ECBAC, Motor City Black Age of Comics, of Quantum Futurism, OnyxCon. There are at least a dozen events each year, because I used to go to them before COVID hit. I would go to at least 12 events a year, just like this, and support with dollars, not with likes and things of that nature, but we purchase things that moves the needle. And that allows these creators that make these works that we say we want to see continue to do what they do, because we ask for it. So if they put their last dollar into making these products that we say we want to see, we deserve to support them so they can continue to do what they do. And any other suggestions in terms of moving this genre forward?
Virtuous Con. So it's Virtuous Con. It is $10. It's every February. It was started by Cerise Rennie Murphy, who has her own publishing company, and she saw that we didn't really have forums for people who don't have travel dollars. So she got corporate sponsors, and she put together a virtual conference that has 4 floors of dealers. So literally, you're on the platform and you can go to the table and the dealer will have a whiteboard. And if I'm not a dealer, but if I go, there's like a knock, like someone at the door to let the person know, hey, someone's at the table. But she also got Anika Noni Rose to come in and read fairy tales for kids. She has panels on all kinds of subjects around Afrofuturism, and she was doing it with her own dime. And she got corporate sponsors, so the only cost is $10. So it opened up, like we talked about the internet, it opened up the field for people who can't get on a plane and get a hotel room and stuff. So think about Virtuous Con. I am the only Black member of the Science Fiction Writers of America Board of Directors. And she is this year's Solstice Award winner for outstanding contributions to advancing science fiction. Several years ago, Jarvis was our winner.
Go Jarvis.
And not to end this on a downer, but we also, as an industry, need to be paying attention to the attempts to ban books around the nation.
Yeah.
There are not many of our speculative fiction books in school libraries to begin with. But I guarantee you, after they go for the school libraries, the public libraries will be next. And after the public libraries, then they'll go start shouting in front of Barnes and Nobles and all the other bookstores. And they might not be targeting us as speculative fiction writers now, but I guarantee you that we're on their list of things they don't want their children reading. So first they came for the school libraries, then they'll go for the public libraries, and I guarantee you they'll come for us sooner or later. So we should also put our power behind stopping it now instead of waiting for them to target us specifically.
Well, if I may, I'll add a little happier note, just because that's what I do. I just encourage people to, if you don't read a lot of speculative fiction, there's a lot out here. You can find a little bit of everything that could be of interest to you. I also encourage you to support your independent stores. Mm-hmm. A lot of those stores carry works by independent authors. They also carry kind of a range of works that can give you some really interesting recommendations. I think we need, more bookstores in our communities, and it's cool to support those that really go out of their way to try to have a cachet of books, some self-published and otherwise. So I encourage people to do that. There's a lineage of works. There's a lot of new works that are out, and then there's a lot of classics, that are there. And I would just experiment with a little bit of all of it. And I think that's sort of a way to go in just terms of informing yourself and just saying, oh, what are people thinking about?
I hate to do this, but we're gonna have to transition to
Okay.
Q&A for about 15 minutes. So if you would start a line on the microphones, we'll be happy to answer questions that you have.
Hi, I'm Vina. I guess my question is going to be more directed towards Christine and Jesse. I know that, well, I don't know, but there's been an explosion of fan fiction over the last decades, even though it had its origins way back in the 70s with the Star Trek fandom. And now it's been expanded to all sorts of fandoms. I know that there is a stigma among traditional gatekeepers against fan fiction. What are your personal opinions about fan fiction?
50 Shades of Grey, she's a millionaire because she was writing fan fiction about Twilight. I think that line has blurred, and my opinion about publishing is for a long time they were part of the problem, and they have figured out they need to change, or they are going to be overrun by new startups who understand. I don't think that stigma. Good writing is good writing. Not all fan fiction is wonderful, but good writing is good writing. And in some cases, it's not that great, but you get 3 movies. And
Right.
I'm wishing I had written that. So.
And I will add in that one of my favorite writers, who's also a Mississippian, Claudia Gray, who is now considered to be the official biographer of Princess Leia for Lucasfilm. She started out writing X-Files fanfic and Harry Potter fanfic. And if you knew some of my usernames, you'd probably be able to find some of my X-Files fanfic and Harry Potter fanfic still floating around on LiveJournal and all the other spaces we used to be on before Twitter came and Twitter and Facebook came and sucked up everything. The one thing I always have people come up to me and ask me about writing and how do I write my first book? And I say the same thing over and over. You learn to write by writing. It doesn't matter whether you're writing fan fiction. It doesn't matter whether you're writing essays. You gotta write to know how to write. I personally have no stigma against anybody who writes fan fiction. You're just writing what you love. Whether publishers agree with that or not, that's on them. I will say that some of the fan fiction you do end up having to take down once you get to a certain level because they don't want it out there. But I think as long as if you're a writer and you're writing, you're doing the right thing. Not trying to be cute with that language
you.
there, but yes.
Thank you. Over here.
Hello, thank you. I'm here with my friends from the Literary Society, and that's how I learned about this conference today. Let me just say that the first time I saw the term Afrofuturism was at the Metropolitan Museum, where they created this replica of Seneca Village,
Right.
a tribute to Seneca Village. But I have a question. Would you see Zora Neale Hurston's book, Their Eyes Were Watching God, as an example of futurism? Because it seemed that way to me. And so that's my question.
Well, I'll just, for me, it's like, as an Afrofuturist, as a practicing Afrofuturist, and I've said this before, so maybe it pays to say it here. It's like DNA, right? What did they do in Jurassic Park? They didn't have all of the different parts, so they had to take parts from this and that to replace those elements, right? So as an Afrofuturist, what you're doing is you're in the present, but you're writing forward towards the future, but you're also filling in the missing components of the past. That's what Zora Neale specializes in. She specializes in documenting, folklore, those type of things.
Right.
So I don't think that's outside of the realm of, I think that's correct. I think she is a futurist.
Mm-hmm.
She certainly was a futurist in the way she carried herself as an operator, mostly black men dominated, but she operated,
Yeah.
Hey, there's a town that's
Yeah.
about her.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think, yeah, of course, she influenced what I do for sure.
Yeah, thank you.
And sorry.
No, and I would just say I agree. I think she was a very futuristic thinker. But the thing about Afrofuturism, I'm glad Tim mentioned this, is it's not just about the future.
Right.
It's about thinking about the future and alternate realities. But you're doing it through this Black cultural perspective wherever you are in the world. And, I talk about Afrofuturism. I use this description of a wheel. At the center, you have Black cultures, and intersecting that is imagination, liberation, technology, and mysticism. So anything that people can describe as Afrofuturist, if it's engaging some of those elements, you could say, oh, they're engaging Afrofuturist thought, right? So I think someone could be Afrofuturist in nature, and you'll have streams of that in their story. Now, whether you want to say the story is Afrofuturist or not gets into a genre thing, right? But you can certainly say they're all informed by it and it shapes their thinking. Because when it comes to this subject, at the core of it is Sankofa, right? So the Akan symbol, that means, it's this bird looking at an egg on its tail and, this different kind of figure. And it's about either go back and get it or retrieve it or, but at the end of the day, it's about bringing the best of the past into the future. And I think as a creative modality, people in the African diaspora are constantly doing that. just as a way of thinking. We're always thinking about where we're going, and then it's like, but where were we? And as you try to, sometimes the future can be as abstract for people as the past when you're separated from it, or you don't know. So you're trying to mine and find these things in the past, and then simultaneously try to architect how to kind of think about futures. So you're informed by what you think the future is, and you're informed by what you think the past is, your relationships to these things, and that becomes your present. So I think that Zora Neale Hurston, as a person who was really getting into African diasporic cosmologies and ways of gathering, Afrofuturism, it's not just the book and the text. It's your space and time is evident in your music. It's evident in the rhythm of how you speak. It's your dialect. It's the color and temperament of the words you choose to use. It's how you gather and shape a space, and how once you're not there, that space is not the same. And to me, she very much recognized that. Although, her stories dealt with a lot of different things. And that's sort of what we're talking about when we're thinking about this contribution or this recognition of our relationship to space and time as people of the African diaspora in the continent.
Thank you.
And let me just add something really quickly. This is one of the reasons why I don't like getting caught up on what is Afrofuturism and what isn't. Because a lot of the fiction writing I do revolves around the past. And does African American fiction about the past, is that excluded from Afrofuturism since we're not writing about the future?
No.
For example, one of the projects I'm working on right now takes real African American history, like Seneca Village, and writes fiction around it. Does that exclude? Does this project get excluded from Afrofuturism because we're taking events that are from the past?
Not based on the way it's defined, no.
Exactly. So I mean, this is one of the reasons why I try my best not to get into arguments online and in person about what fits and what doesn't. Is it a good story? Did you enjoy it? Then that should be enough.
All right, I think we got another question over here on the side.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for your time. My question is, how do you see Black speculative writing, Black Afrofuturism, Black science fiction writing as a vehicle for Black liberation? As we were, discussing in the previous panel about different movements going hand in hand, cultural and political together. So, what do you see that?
Sometimes the hint is in a book. Think about that. If we are successful as writers, what we do is you read our books and you are immersed for a period of time, and the outside world disappears. And within that, books are often about problem solving, and you as the reader can be following along with that character in a safe space. So when I was doing a speech for World Fantasy, I said, the advantage of books is it teaches people that they can go out and slay dragons and be singed and dirty and still come out triumphant at the end. So sometimes our action is sometimes preceded by books that slip in information about how you approach those problems. And I think we need more of it, and the world has been more receptive when it's not as overt as we think it is. They're just thinking it's a good story.
Yeah, I would say just real quick, because I want to say it publicly. My dad, I was telling Natasha this the other day, my dad is going to be 89 in August. And his grandmother, he only met her once, her name was Maddie Waddy. And I named that character, that my great-grandmother, after that character. And I always told my dad when I first published it, even though I created the character back in the 90s, I told him, I said, one day your grandmother's name will be all over. And he looked at me, and just the other day I told him, I said, Dad, that character is represented at least 3 times in the Smithsonian. You understand? I said, that's what literature can do. And he started screaming, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So that's the power that's inherent in the form. Yes. And I think that's everything to me.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, one really fantastic. Really quickly, one quote from Isaac Asimov. He stated that Today's science fiction is tomorrow's science fact. And so
Yes.
you've seen Star Trek with the cell phones and flat screens and
Communicator.
things of that nature. You see that, but it's not just with objects. We can dream up new societies and solutions to problems that are going on now. And so that's the power of Black speculative fiction.
My question to the panel is, why do you think that certain, we have a series of Black production companies across. Why do you think that it's kind of slow for them to pick up on Afrofuturism and these type of sci-fi movies of late? I understand, mostly we understand that most production companies, especially the Hollywood industry, is still white dominated, but we still have certain seats at the table. So why do you think that, they're slow to push the work or find authors to utilize their work?
Well, there's a lot of works that are in conversation, and then there's some great works that came out. I mean, Lovecraft Country was amazing.
Yeah.
It was one season. Then there's The Watchmen.
Watchmen.
Yeah, the way that series was averted. Now that was one season, but these are epic projects, right? There was Kindred, which was of course canceled, as we're there was interesting. There was a conversation there, so I think there's a lot. But what you probably do see are a lot of Black characters in certain storylines sort of popping up. I think about American Gods. And how, that series, especially the some of those seasons, they always had Black gods present, gods and goddesses, as figuring into the storyline. The main character had a Black parent, so I think there's things that are happening, and then there's a lot of projects that are like in the works, that are kind of yet to be seen. But that said, there's also the indie space of creating. I'm a filmmaker. I've made, independent films. Neptune's Cross by Saul Williams. And I believe his partner's name is Anissa. My apologies if I'm saying their name wrong. But that film is phenomenal. And that film, again, is toured around. I would suggest you watch that if you haven't. Have you seen Neptune's Cross?
I'm not sure if I've seen it yet.
You've got to watch that film. It's amazing. So, but that to say, I think I hate to say things are processed because that's
Right.
doesn't explain things. But there's a lot of people really working on it very hard.
And I will just say really quickly, I have to disagree with your entire premise because I'm old enough to say 20 years ago, there was nothing. And even the one or two, the Lovecraft Countries and the Watchmens that we're seeing now, and some of the independent films that we're seeing now, that is tenfold what we had 20, 25 years ago. We had nothing. It's hard to believe now. Wesley Snipes had tried for years to make Black Panther, and no one wanted it. So we're seeing so much now.
I'm going to be in the middle because I have a kid in the industry. Funding and distribution is still a problem. So we see more, but a lot of those things that we're talking about now are still white led.
Yeah.
I think Jordan Peele coming out with his movies has really opened up some of the possibilities in a way that Ava DuVernay is still trying to push through mainstream stuff. So, but you're still looking for people with deep pockets of money. So I would encourage you to do two things. If you're ever in Martha's Vineyard, there's a Black Film Festival, and I watched funders in that audience ask producers after the screening of the film, how much money do you need? Because there's a lot of wealth going down there, and it's Black people. And then the second thing is, here in New York, there's Quelly TV, which you can, subscribe to on your Roku disc or something, and they are trying to do more Black programming. But it comes down to Hollywood is following where the buzz is. We need to be the buzz.
Yeah, this is really the part where the Academy Awards, they play that music at the end. It's like,
Wrap it
and
up.
I get to be that guy. So first of all, please join me in a round of applause for our panelists, please. Mr. Jarvis Sheffield, thank you so much. Mr. Tim Fielder, this is where you're supposed to say, hey, you're clapping alone here. We have Christine Taylor-Butler, so thank you so much. We have Yatasha Womack. No relation to Bobby, by the way, but possibly, we don't know
A
for
little
sure,
bit.
right?
It's
Yes,
speculative.
Speculative. And let's see, and then we have Tim Fielder, right?
Jesse Holland.
How did I miss him? I'm sorry. Yes, Jesse Holland.
I told y'all I was a poor cousin.
Great.